how about we have a little discussion about fire temples? Now, I've already covered my thoughts on water, desert, and forest dungeons in Zelda, so now it's time for fire. These are probably the most hit or miss dungeons for me. Some I absolutely love, and some I absolutely loathe. Keep in mind that these are just the fire dungeons I have personally played through, so you may notice some missing from my list. Without further ado, this is my Zelda Fire Dungeon Retrospective. What a gorgeous dungeon with its dilapidated yet colorful architecture. It really makes you think about how the Earth Temple must have looked in its prime, in all its splendor. The beetle is a great item and was used masterfully in here to drop drawbridges and open gates. Man, I cannot get over how much fun it was to roll around on these huge boulders, especially over that very narrow lava bridge toward the end. The dragon designs were a great choice for the aesthetic, and the lava looks so good and so bright flowing from their mouths that this is just some of the best looking lava in all of Zelda. One thing that does drag the Earth Temple down is the item, the bombs. Bombs just don't work for me as a dungeon item. I just really don't like getting them in a dungeon. Now, I did appreciate the mini-boss throwback to Dodongo's Cavern, in the choice of the enemies, the design of the room, and the bombs. It was a nice homage. I love the Indiana Jones moment here as well. And you know what? ℉𝕗𝕗𝕚𝕒 wasn't that great of a boss in my opinion. Oh, but thank goodness we didn't have to fight Drab Majesty, Girahim, for the 18th time in the game. Nah, but honestly, ℉𝕗𝕗𝕚, he's just another suck-in-the-bomb boss, and I really just didn't care for it, since that seems to be the gimmick of a lot of these fire bosses, and it just ended up not being that much fun for me. ℉𝕗𝕗𝕚 also looked pretty silly with his noodly arms and his meatball head. Dude should have been called Pyroclastic Spaghetti and Meatball ℉𝕗𝕗𝕚. In summary, what I liked about the Earth Temple was the gorgeous aesthetics, the use of the beetle, and the rock rolling. What I did not like about the Earth Temple was the dungeon item and the boss ℉𝕗𝕗𝕚. Alright, let's get a little controversial here. Wind Waker is my least favorite 3D Zelda game, and as such, I never much cared for its dungeons, to be honest with you. Dragon Roost Cavern to me it's a very run-of-the-mill dungeon. Not bad, but not great. Just kind of decent, I'd say. It follows the very basic layout of having one large, circular hub with different branching directions, and you essentially just make a circle. This makes Dragon Roost Cavern a little too easy to follow, and dare I say, linear. The grappling hook was annoying to use for me, since for some reason it took me forever to figure out how to even rotate Link on it. A simple mechanic made more complex than it needed to be. On top of having one of the most annoying items, this dungeon also has a rat problem. Rats being some of the most annoying enemies in the game. They fit right in with this dungeon. If I had things my way, this dungeon would be centered around collecting glue traps and plugging all the rats' nests with them. A saving grace of this dungeon is the outside area, which was honestly just a blast to traverse through, offering sidling, precise jumping, and some actually fun grappling. The lava bursting out of the sides of the cavern gave an added challenge, and of course, Valoo is just a homie. Words fail to describe how much I despise these magtails, man, throughout the entire game even. They're long, they're fast, spiky, and while lava doesn't kill them, they just about killed me from pushing me into the lava over and over. Getting the hit timing on them to where they curl up into a ball is the most finicky thing ever, and it sent me into multiple blind fits of rage. Now, I will say, I did like the big water jars that made some stepping stones in the lava. That was a rather cool concept that added a bit of fun to this otherwise tedious, kind of one-note dungeon. The boss, Gohma, is another huge saving grace for Dragon Roost Cavern. The fight is just awesome, letting you hang and swing over this massive lava pit, dodging the attacks of this huge molten arachnid. Oodles of fun, and leagues better than the Gohma fight in Ocarina of Time. My only complaint was that it lasted about 12 seconds, and then it was over. It should have been a much longer fight, perhaps with another stage, but it was still fun while it lasted. In summary, what I liked about Dragon Roost Cavern was the outside areas, Valoo, and the epic Gohma fight. What I did not like about Dragon Roost Cavern was its straightforwardness, its unbearably annoying enemies, and the grappling hook. Most fire dungeons in Zelda have this whole ascending up the mountain lead up that I'm usually a big fan of, but man, I detested Mount Crenel in this game. It took more effort to ascend Mount Crenel with the broken Pickery sword than it took for Frodo and Sam to ascend Mount Doom with the One Ring. Once you actually get into the Cave of Flames, things do get a little bit better, albeit not much. The music wasn't particularly good or exciting. Many of the rooms were filled with this annoying smoke that made it hard to even see anything. I'll admit that riding the minecarts was pretty enjoyable, but I would have liked to see a lot more of them. Maybe then this dungeon would be more memorable. It was also enjoyable to catch those little wind gusts and float over some of those obstacles, but nah, it was done better later on. The mini-boss was so forgettable, I had to look up what it even was, and even then I didn't remember it. It's like what, some gray choo-choos with some spikes sticking out of it? Nah, lame. The Cane of Patchy was a decent item, but really only in dungeon. And afterwards Link basically just sticks it in his back pocket and never uses it again. It could flip some junk and that's about it. ℉𝕦𝕒𝕟 here is just not enough to save this dungeon. I'm sorry, he's too small, he's too short, and far too easy. The Cane of Patchy was used like absolute crap, to be honest, in this fight. It just, it flips over his oddly spiky rock shell, and for some reason this makes him extend his neck perfectly across the gap to provide a perfect bridge to his weak spot. Yeah, I just didn't buy it. This dungeon could have been so much better, but it fell so short for me. In summary, what I liked about the Cave of Flames was riding the rails, and the Cane of Patchy being a relatively okay item. What I did not like about the Cave of Flames was the extremely boring theme, the forgettable enemies, the smoke that shrouded half the rooms, and the disappointing boss fight with ℉𝕦𝕒𝕟. The Forest Temple is a tough act to follow, but I must say that I think the Fire Temple edged it out for me. Why, you ask? Because this temple is fire, that's why. No, literally. The Fire Temple. One thing that immediately made this dungeon stand out is that we already knew what the boss would be before even entering. We were informed by our young prodigy here that a fire-breathing dragon had reawakened and that Rudania had gone to slay it. That unfortunately doesn't go quite to plan. We also learned that the Gorons had been captured and locked away inside the temple. Honestly, the Gorons were my least favorite part of this dungeon. Not because I dislike the Gorons, but because I always feel the need to talk to and free every single one of them. It takes forever, but I'm sorry, I just cannot bring myself to leave them behind, and you have to listen to their 10-minute long speeches to get them to leave their cells. It is a lot of fun solving the various puzzles to open their cells, however, and in all fairness, they do provide some helpful hints. I love dungeons with a lot of keys, of course being such a big fan of the Water Temple, and this dungeon was no exception. Room after room with keys, gold skulltulas, all sorts of fire-based puzzles, falling doors, rolling boulders, narrow walkways, walls of flames, made for an intricate, yet very well-paced and thoroughly fun dungeon. Speaking of those narrow walkways though, who can forget this extremely nerve-wracking ascent up to the Megaton Hammer, where if you're so unfortunate as to fall off, you have to work your way all the way back up to that chamber again. Unless you're an absolute Giga Chad and use Ferori's Wind. Yeah, I won't lie, I've taken a few tumbles off the edge there, and it usually has me yelling louder than Link does on his way down. The Megaton Hammer is used exceptionally well in the Fire Temple, even though I initially thought it would be kinda clunky and annoying to handle, like Twilight Princess's Ball and Chain. There were two mini-bosses in this dungeon, being the two fire dancers, and they were slippery little guys. Once we're done listening to the life stories of every Goron and collecting so many keys that Florida would be jealous, we then hop on over to the boss, Volvagia. If you're a fan of Whack-A-Mole, then you undoubtedly enjoyed this fight. Volvagia's design is intimidating, and yes, the use of the Megaton Hammer to smash in its head was satisfying. My one gripe is that Volvagia was by far the easiest adult boss. You could literally just hang on to the side of the arena and all of its attacks would miss you, but it did look pretty cool. In summary, what I liked about the Fire Temple was the intricacy of the dungeon item, the Megaton Hammer, and Volvagia. What I did not like about the Fire Temple was feeling the compulsion to talk to every Goron, and a change to the music. The original theme with the Islamic chants was way better than the changed version. Once again, Twilight Princess delivers my favorite dungeon of the video, Goron Mines. Now this dungeon has a proper ascending up the mountain lead up, including launching off the backs of Gorons, taking a dip in a Goron hot spring, dodging fumaroles, and to top it all off, sumo wrestling with an old flabby Goron elder. Once you enter the mines, you're immediately greeted by one of the most fitting and amazing dungeon themes in all of Zelda. The shimmering mirage of heat in the distance is a great touch that really exudes warmth. This is just an industrial, smoky, hot place that fully lives up to its title. What makes Goron Mines so good too is that it's not just room after room with lava and smoke. You get underwater rooms as well, which you'd never expect from a fire dungeon. You even get aspects of electricity, the iron boots being able to cling to the magnetic blue rock that adorns much of the dungeon. Oh, and it's such a great feeling getting sucked up by those magnets too, especially hanging upside down. It gives you such a different look than we get with any other Zelda dungeon. Another highly unique aspect of this dungeon is that we don't just get the boss key. We actually have to collect all 3 shards of it from each Goron Elder. Dan Goro, the mini-boss, made for a pretty tough fight that required some good timing. You fought him over a pool of molten lava on a very unsteady and precarious platform. One thing that made no sense though is how stabbing him right in his beer gut didn't completely disembowel him. Despite the unrealism though, Dan Goro was a fun fight. The item is the hero's bow, which the bow has always just been such a great item that never goes out of style, unlike Colin's bowl cut. We get a Wild West style fest standoff room with a few branching directions and a large magnet that carries us toward the boss's lair. And arriving at the boss here, Fyrus takes the coolest looking boss award for the video, and man, the fight just feels as cool as he looks. You almost feel like you're fighting just a giant flaming grizzly bear. The dude is simply massive. Not a very hard fight, but it does actually drag on for a good while. In summary, what I liked about the Goron Mines was the perfectly fitting score, Dan Goro, the variety of different locales, the amazing concept of magnetic boots, and Fyrus being just an absolute beast. What I did not like about the Goron Mines was literally nothing. This is undoubtedly my favorite fire dungeon, and one of my favorite dungeons just ever. The first thing you get when you enter Rudania is a room full of pitch darkness. I really loved seeing those blue flames just glimmering in the utter darkness and trying to find your way through to the puzzles and terminals before getting the sunlight in there. It started off on just a very enjoyable, ominous note. And that's basically the extent of anything remarkable about Rudania, unfortunately. This was one of my least favorite divine beasts, and it had, hands down, the most annoying approach of the 4. Just think of what we get as the approach to the other divine beasts. You got riding sand seals, sniping the feet of a giant camel, riding a fish person, sniping the turrets of a giant elephant, soaring 1,000 feet in the air, sniping the wings of a giant bird. And what do we get with Rudania here? Escorting a bumbling idiot up the mountain past a bunch of guardian sentries. Man, I really hate stealth sequences in Zelda. I also felt like Rudania had the fewest puzzles out of the 4, and it took the least amount of time to complete. The puzzle with the rolling orb and the little grate, that was child's play, and the torch lighting puzzles were amateurish. So basically, Rudania took about 6 painstaking hours to get to for about 20 minutes of lame gameplay. Now, for some reason, Fireblight Ganon gave me a really hard time on my first go around. Nowadays I can beat him with ease, but he proved to be the second hardest Blight Ganon in the game for me. Fireblight Ganon did have a cool blue sword, kind of in the shape of a hook, which looked pretty gnarly, but the concept of making him suck in your bomb is just so overused. It was a nice setting for a boss fight, being in the middle of a molten volcano, and actually Fireblight Ganon was just one of the more decent boss fights in the game, but it wasn't nearly enough to redeem Rudania in my eyes. In summary, what I liked about Rudania was the darkness, and Fireblight Ganon being a semi-decent boss. What I did not like about Rudania was the painstaking lead-up and the insultingly simple puzzles. Dodongos have always been awesome enemies, so having a dungeon inside the remains of a massive Dodongo was a novel idea, much better than a dungeon inside of a fish. Dodongo's Cavern was rather straightforward, which is to be expected of a child dungeon, but it did have a delightful assortment of enemies like the Dodongos themselves, Fire Keys, Armos, and Beamos. The Fire Keys could prove to be nuisances if they made contact with your wooden Deku shield, however. The rooms with the eye switches were an absolute blast, albeit short-lived. The torch room with the big Dodongos is always intimidating with Link being so small, and the mini-boss fight with the Lizalfos is actually pretty good. People might not agree with me on that, but one thing we can all agree on is that this business scrub right here is a con artist. 50 rupees for a Deku shield you can literally get for free in a chest later on? This dude is gypping us. It's probably a counterfeit shield even. But once again, one thing that detracts from the dungeon, in my opinion, is the item. The bombs. Bombs just don't really seem like they should be a dungeon item, but rather an item you can just buy from a shop like in most other Zelda games. Unfortunately, this dungeon saves the most annoying room for last, with all these low-flying keys dive-bombing you as you're just trying to climb the stinking blocks, man. At least there's a courtesy fairy in one of the pots after feeling the wrath of 1,000 keys. The boss, King Dodongo, is the second best child boss, in my opinion, just behind Baronade. He's just this massive dinosaur monster looking to suck some bombs. I mean, he's honestly not hard in the least, but his design is rather intimidating. And the way King Dodongo dies is pretty metal too. I mean, just look at him. Dude's headbanging with the devil horns out like he's at a Gojira concert. In summary, what I liked about Dodongo's Cavern was the setting, being inside of a giant dead Dodongo, the assortment of enemies, and King Dodongo himself. What I did not like about Dodongo's Cavern was the business scrub that tries to rip off a little kid, the theme basically just being some random noises, and bombs as the dungeon item. And there you have it, my Zelda Fire Dungeon retrospective. I know I shared some controversial opinions in here. Please let me know what you think of all these dungeons. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure to subscribe for more, my Hylians.